Atlantis was supposed to be a resource base. Instead, it became the place where an underworld gate was forced open, where prisoners lost their bodies, their names, and their future. Every possession made the mystics more stable. Every expansion brought Cornu closer to crossing over. And while the world argued over diplomacy, Velgrynd was already finding the family thread that could pull the crisis into the open. AI Anime and Manga presents. If you are enjoying the story, please like, comment, and subscribe. YouTube members get upcoming episodes early and help cover the AI narration, subtitles, thumbnails, and renders that keep this project moving. Now, let's begin where the invasion is already digging in. Atlantis. Atlantis was the smallest landmass in the United States of Assyria. It lay far to the east, covered in tropical rainforest, thick jungle, and heat. But the jungle was not what made it valuable. Atlantis also held metal-producing mines, oil fields, and enough buried resources to turn it into the largest military base in all Assyrian territory. That importance became the start of its tragedy. Near the base stood ancient ruins, and directly over those ruins, an underworld gate had opened to another world. Long ago, the indigenous people of that land had performed a ritual meant to communicate with their gods. The ceremony had left a small rift in space-time. When the mystics discovered that weakness, they worked it into a stable gate. Then they possessed the locals, used those bodies to welcome the Assyrian military, and seized the very base the Assyrians had built. Atlantis had become a beachhead for an invasion from the other side. The man commanding the gathered crowd wore khaki camouflage. His black hair was brushed back, his eyes were narrow and cold, and there was a sharp intellectual glint behind his glasses. He looked like a Japanese officer, but that was only the body. The being inside had once been one of Cornu's cherubs, an aide from the heavenly realms who had evolved into a mystic. He had no mystic name of his own. Some of the three mystic leaders bothered to name their servants, but Cornu did not value bonds with his team enough to do that. So this former cherub called himself Masahiko Amari, the name of the man whose body he had taken. The original Masahiko Amari had been a Japanese secret agent sent to investigate the Assyrian base. He was skilled enough to compete with Kondo for the title of strongest in Japan, but talent did not protect him from bad luck. He did not know Kondo had already been defeated. By the time he understood what had happened in Atlantis, he was overpowered, possessed, and repurposed. Because his body had been strengthened with battle will, it made an ideal vessel. More than 100 days had passed since the possession began, and Cornu's servant, a martial-class mystic at the top end of their hierarchy, could now use Amari's body almost perfectly. His existence points easily reached 10 million, and with Amari's knowledge and skills added on top, he had become even more dangerous. Amari ordered the workers to hurry. Expand the gate faster. This is still far too small for Cornu to pass through. The mechanics mattered. A visitor from another world could only fully manifest if their magicule count fit within the scale of the gate. If they were too large, they had to leave their main body behind, send a separate body over through a soul corridor, and slowly rebuild power on the other side. That separate body could be revived if it died, but it would lose a great deal of strength. Memories and experience would remain, but the mystic would still need a new physical body to possess. The three mystic leaders were on a different level. Their souls were so heavy with power that an ordinary underworld gate meant almost nothing. A gate rated at 1 million EP would barely be enough to manifest them at all. The gate at Atlantis was not there yet, but constant construction had made it larger than Velgrynd had expected. It had reached roughly 100,000 EP, enough for staff officer mystics to fully manifest. Those officers were not small threats. In other worlds, they would rank around Demon Lord seeds, each commanding regiments and forming the backbone of the invasion. Prisoners stood in line before the gate, their minds dominated. One by one, Yohma took them over. Possession gave the mystics two advantages at once, a physical body and the name attached to that body. As half-spiritual life forms, they were unstable without that anchor. A body and a name gave them a defined self, and the knowledge stolen from the host made even low-ranked privates useful in war. That was why Amari cared so much about the expansion work. Every new body made the invasion more stable. Every stolen name gave another mystic a firmer grip on this world. and every increase in the gate's scale brought Cornu closer to stepping through without relying on a weakened separate body. Atlantis was not just an occupied base anymore. It was being converted into the foundation for a full mystic landing. David Reagan, or rather the general class mystic possessing him, advised Amari that there was little need to rush. Everything is going according to plan. We have investigated this planet's ability to wage war, and almost nobody here can threaten us. David Reagan's possessed body had fully manifested as well, with an EP above 600,000. It was no wonder Kondo had failed to beat him. Li Jinlong objected from beside him. How many times do I have to remind you? We still have Xienhua, the Holy Fist, on our side. In my memories, that woman could defeat our staff officers easily. David only chuckled. We are fine. Pulcinella has been sent to handle her. Xienhua is no threat to us now. That surprised Li Jinlong, but it also made him smile. Pulcinella, the mad priest, once the great hope of mankind, had been traveling the world to investigate the vision he had received. Instead, he had fought the Yohma, lost, and been taken over. Another martial-level mystic had been installed in him, making the tragedy complete. Pulcinella had become a Yohma ruler on the same level as Amari. Li admitted that he had planned to go after Xienhua himself. Killing her would have been simple, but that would damage the vessel. Pulcinella, he thought, would probably manage without ruining her. David did not disagree. Humanity in this world was weak. Still, Xienhua was exceptional enough that she might become a suitable vessel for Cornu himself. That was why the mystics did not want some lower-ranked soldier to handle her. They were far too strong against ordinary humans, and they were still not fully accustomed to their borrowed physical bodies. Cornu's direct aides were better suited for that delicate work. David even joked that if Cornu did not want a female body, they could find another vessel and David could take over Xienhua instead. The man who had owned David Reagan's body had apparently been infatuated with her, and now David was becoming curious himself. Li Jinlong called that small-minded. Cornu would hardly care about gender, so David should banish the thought immediately. The two of them spoke as if the matter were already settled, but Amari could not shake his unease. It was not because the invasion was failing. Far from it. 4 generals and 2 marshals under Cornu had fully manifested. The Underworld Gate was expanding. Cornu's vessel was being prepared. Pulcinella and the other generals were active. By every ordinary measure, this world was already trapped on the road to ruin. Only Cornu's manifestation remained. Amari reviewed the board and told himself there was no path for a comeback. He was certain he had not overlooked anything. And that was exactly why his anxiety was justified. No one could reasonably be expected to imagine that Velgrynd would suddenly drop by. Amari shook off the feeling and gave his final order. Human resistance was barely worth attention, but the finishing touches still mattered. Everyone was to devote themselves completely. After the Imperial Conference in Japan, Velgrynd went straight to the palace's great library. Library was not an exaggeration. An entire floor was piled high with more tomes than most people would know what to do with, and Velgrynd had questions. Certain country names and personal names had been bothering her since the conference. The Holy Arcian Empire sounded as if it might be connected to the Kingdom of Arcia, the nation she had once guided. The United States of Aziria had a president named George Hayes, and that name matched someone she had met before jumping through time. If Velgrynd remembered correctly, George's father, Laurent Hayes, had possessed a fragment of Ludora's soul. She had accompanied Laurent from young adulthood all the way to his peaceful final days. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. Similar names could appear in unrelated worlds, even worlds that were not parallel in any true sense. Their origins and natural laws might differ completely, yet the same names could reappear as if someone were playing a joke. Velgrynd knew that, so she decided to check the history before trusting her memory. She began with the Holy Arcian Empire and confirmed that a kingdom of Arcia had indeed existed on this planet. Its kings and retainers carried names she recognized. The legacy of the Arcia she knew was still alive here. Then she investigated George Hayes. His father was Laurent Hayes, president from 7 terms ago. That clinched it. Velgrynd smiled as she remembered George as a boy who adored his father and always talked about becoming a great president himself. Laurent had passed away peacefully at 62. George had been 27 at the time and he was 52 now. That meant Velgrynd had returned to the exact same world 25 years later. That also meant Oharu had likely been alive a quarter century ago. In other words, two different people had possessed fragments of Ludora's soul during the same period. That was rare but not impossible. Soul fragments reacted strongly as their possessors approached death, so overlap could happen under the right circumstances. That was why Velgrynd had gone to the library in the first place. She wanted proof that the names were not just a coincidence. She remembered how Laurent had nearly been killed by a gang of thugs. That moment was when she had jumped into this world and saved him. It was a fond memory, but she did not linger there. Instead, she looked for George's son. She remembered blessing the baby. The family tree confirmed it, Emile Hayes. The name was exactly as she recalled, and now there was no doubt. Then Velgrynd found an irritating detail in Laurent's biography. According to the record, Laurent had married late because he was constantly shadowed by a mysterious, beautiful woman. Velgrynd considered that slander. It was not entirely wrong, but she had never meant to interfere with Laurent's life. She had told him he was free to love whomever he wanted. Still, it was probably hard for any woman to approach a man who always had a supermodel-class beauty at his side. In practical terms, Velgrynd really had been one major reason Laurent married so late. She muttered that she wished she could send the author a complaint letter. Unfortunately for her and fortunately for the author, the writer had died long ago. Velgrynd finished her library work and continued enjoying her time in the palace. No one could stop her except Oharu, and Oharu largely gave her free rein. His instincts told him that was the safest and most moderate choice. Not everyone welcomed her so calmly. The military officers who knew what she was gave her plenty of leeway, but the ladies of the palace were another matter. Oharu's wife, the Empress, was among them. At their first meeting, the Empress called Velgrynd's closeness with His Majesty repulsive, especially when nobody knew where she came from. The Empress was 50, the daughter of a prestigious noble prince, and still active in a world where medicine and sorcery had stretched the average lifespan to around 60. But to Velgrynd, she was like a cute puppy. Velgrynd had lived beside Ludora in many forms across many years. Women like the Empress were familiar territory. Velgrynd refused to be provoked. She told the Empress that such a cute face would go to waste if she spent all day scowling, and surely Oharu would want her to stay beautiful for him. Then Velgrynd reached out and caressed the Empress's hair before she could avoid it. The surprise did not end there. The Empress's skin regained a youthful gloss right before everyone's eyes. Velgrynd told her that she looked much prettier now, but maintenance was important. She would teach her breathing techniques for spiritual balance, so the Empress had better practice them properly. The Empress had no answer, neither did her attendants. They had just watched the Empress regain the beauty of her youth. When the Empress finally found her voice, she asked if Velgrynd could turn back time. Velgrynd laughed and said no. She had merely energized the Empress's skin cells to make her look better. The Empress had not changed species, and she was still mortal. That was what Velgrynd believed anyway. From her perspective, the adjustment was a tiny thing, but it had improved far more than the Empress's skin. Her body was healthier, more resistant to illness, and more efficient at digestion. She had gained nearly perfect anti-aging traits. If she kept practicing the breathing methods Velgrynd taught her, her potential lifespan would likely more than double. The Empress immediately decided she had misjudged Ryu-oh. The attendants followed right behind her. None of them were going to reject free youth, and soon the palace ladies were asking to be taught the breathing technique as well. A few days passed like that. Velgrynd taught meditation, enjoyed high tea, and lived with true elegance. The military, however, was busy and not making much progress. Negotiations with the other countries were crawling. There was still no sign of an international summit. With no progress to report, Oharu had not held another imperial conference. Pointless meetings would only waste time, and he preferred to let everyone focus on useful work. Velgrynd did not object to that, but she was growing unhappy. The Yohma were still preparing. If the human nations did not hurry, the question of how to hold a summit would soon become meaningless. Velgrynd would have to take center stage and fight before humanity had united enough to defend itself. She did not mind chasing away the mystics. The problem was that doing so alone would not end the war. Humanity would still be fragmented, confused, and vulnerable to the next disaster. That thought depressed her, so she decided to help a little. For all her pride, Velgrynd really did like being helpful. Just past noon, she strode uninvited into the Foreign Ministry's intelligence office and asked whether negotiations were going well. The room was already chaotic, and her sudden arrival did nothing to soothe the bureaucrats working there. Velgrynd did not care. One official tried to tell her that only authorized people could enter. Velgrynd cut him off. 3 days had passed. Had any country agreed to talk? Reluctantly, the official explained the situation. The Republic of Chinese Fiefdoms had said it would attend a summit only if all the other warring nations did. The Greater Rossiam dynasty had taken the same position. That sounded reasonable, but in practice it meant no. The United States of Assyria and the Holy Arcian Empire both answered that now was not the time. Their countries were in chaos, their leaders could not leave their borders, and none of them were in a position to hold a summit, whether in person or by communicator. The haggard official said they were still trying to reason with them. Velgrynd rolled her eyes and praised them for taking their time. Then she decided she would help. The bureaucrats did not appreciate that. One of them snapped that intelligence was their business, not hers. She might be powerful and beautiful, but he preferred that she not interfere. Even angry, the man could not quite deny her beauty. Unfortunately for him, the rest of his judgment was terrible. Velgrynd snapped back that if she left the matter to them, the enemy would move before they finished talking. Then she shoved the official away, sat at his communications equipment, glanced over the controls, and contacted the Assyrian intelligence department on her first try. She did not bother with formalities. She simply asked if they could hear her. A strained Assyrian voice answered that Japan should stop hounding them. They had passed the request to their higher-ups, but the president was busy. There was no time for negotiations. The Assyrians were enemies, but they were also being used by the Yohma. That was probably why they were responding at all instead of ignoring Japan outright. Still, they had not arranged a meeting because Assyria was in domestic chaos, and Japan understood that. Velgrynd did not care. She told the operator to put little George on the line, their president. The operator protested that she could not call the president Little George, and that he had already explained they were busy. Velgrynd only told him to say Velgrynd was calling. She thought George would come right over. The operator was confused, but Velgrynd ended the call. She knew the president of Assyria personally, and she intended to use that. If the message reached President Hayes, things would move quickly. If it did not, she would simply visit him in person. She knew where he would be, in the same place as 25 years ago, even if only a few days had passed for her. Physical positions stayed constant across timelines, so spatial transport would solve the rest. Velgrynd decided that if he did not answer within a day, she would go to him. Next came the Holy Arcian Empire. Velgrynd knew how she wanted to negotiate with them. She opened a channel and delivered a one-sided message. Their emperor was to agree to the conquering empire of Japan's request. In exchange, Japan would provide another sacred treasure, whether a sword, a spear, or a bow. Velgrynd herself guaranteed it, so they should hurry. The Arcian communications officer had no idea what to do with that. He did not take orders from a woman calling herself Velgrynd, but this was an official international channel, so he could not ignore it. He also could not run to the emperor whenever he felt like it. The request was absurd. Even so, he reported it to his superior because she had used the word sacred treasure. The Holy Arcian Empire possessed a famous fighting force called the Seven Sacred Treasures. The name referred to 7 people chosen by conscious weapons that accepted only their proper owners. The story had been handed down since the nation's founding. Every Arcian knew it, and most of the world knew at least the outline. So casually promising to create another sacred treasure was close to blasphemy. Saying it during diplomacy was worse. The call would be recorded and the statement could easily become fuel for a wider war. The Japanese official whom Velgrynd had shoved aside understood that perfectly, and he panicked. He said he might, in theory, be able to blame the Assyria call on Velgrynd alone, though he absolutely would not. But the Arcian message was impossible to walk back. Another official accused her of using a false name and creating a diplomatic disaster. Velgrynd did not consider her own name false. But to people who did not know her, it sounded like a scam. They were wrong, and she had no interest in explaining. Complaining now would change nothing. The other nations would respond however they responded. Once her moves were made, Velgrynd had tea prepared and enjoyed an elegant break while she waited. Meanwhile, the head of the Foreign Ministry's intelligence department silently fumed. Depending on how the other nations responded, he was ready to accuse her of high treason. He had been quiet around His Majesty, but in his mind Velgrynd was waiting for Japan's weakest moment so she could swindle them with outrageous lies. At the Imperial Conference, she had made impossible claims. If she was telling the truth, humanity had no hope. If she was lying, she was a dangerous fraud. Unable to process that, the official slid into denial and began seeing Velgrynd as the villain. His anxiety and anger built until he was almost at the end of his rope. Then a message arrived from Aziria with startling speed. The voice on the other end called out to Velgrynd as if greeting an old friend. It was President George Hayes. Velgrynd answered him casually as Little George and said she had heard he was president now. She wished Laurent were alive to see what a fine man he had become. George was delighted. He recognized her voice and said he had never thought he would meet her again. Everyone listening in Japan froze. The official who had doubted Velgrynd was no longer angry, he was simply overwhelmed. Velgrynd was not using a fake name. Ryu-oh was personally connected to the president of Aziria. None of it made sense to him. Velgrynd ignored their confusion. She apologized to George for asking favors out of nowhere, but told him there was something important she needed to settle before they caught up properly. Had he heard what was happening? George said yes, but he also had matters he wanted to discuss. He asked if she would hear him out before moving to her business. Velgrynd agreed. He was Laurent's pride and joy, she said. She almost felt like a mother to him. George thanked her and said he was happy to hear that. As for the current crisis, he wanted everyone to sit down and brief one another properly. Velgrynd agreed and asked if that meant he would carry out her request. George said it would not be a problem. He asked when the meeting would be held. Velgrynd said she would decide once she checked with Ludora, then corrected herself to His Majesty the Emperor. George remembered that she had mentioned one other person from his father's generation. He could not remain on constant standby, but he would arrange things so he could sit down whenever she needed. And just like that, the president of Aziria had promised to attend. The Arcians called not long after. The speaker asked whether Lady Velgrynd was present, and Velgrynd answered that she was. The man introduced himself as Bright, leader of the 7 sacred treasures. He was honored to speak with her, but he had one question to confirm. Was she truly the goddess they worshipped? Velgrynd found the question pointless. How did they expect to verify it? It was not as if they had someone old enough to remember her directly. And if their emperor had heard her name and still failed to contact her himself, she wanted to know whether the descendants of Xin had become so small-minded. Bright reacted sharply to the name Xin, their divine founding emperor. But before he could build momentum, Velgrynd continued. Why were they called the 7 sacred treasures? She was quite sure she had left 12 god-class weapons, not 7. Surely they had not lost or stolen any. Surely they did not lack 12 people worthy of being chosen by those treasures. That was not the case, was it? Bright's anger vanished. The woman on the other end really was the goddess. His own master had told him the truth in secret. There had been 12 treasures. The government had hidden the full number so it could preserve the arsenal for desperate times. Of course, Velgrynd's guess was not perfectly favorable to them. Over 4,000 years, 3 treasures had been lost. 1 had been taken by a traitor, and 2 vanished when their owners went to war and never returned. At present, the Arcians had only 9 left. 1 belonged to the Emperor's personal bodyguard and assistant. 1 sat masterless in the National Archives, and only 8 were currently held by chosen wielders. The fact that Velgrynd knew enough to corner him with that truth unnerved Bright. More than that, her voice itself put him in awe. So he bowed his head to the communications equipment even though she could not see it, and apologized. He promised to report her demands to the Emperor of Arcia immediately. Velgrynd still had more complaints, but she let him go. 2 nations were now moving at her command. Next, she turned to the greater Rossiam dynasty. She opened a channel to their intelligence department, only to find the line blocked by interference. She asked the nearest official when they had last contacted Rossiam. The official answered that the last contact had been early that morning. Because the nations were at war, they opened the hotline 6 times a day, day and evening, regardless of time differences. Normally, such a channel would help negotiate armistice terms. Now it was being used to exchange information about the Yohma, since every nation had let its military run too far out of control and needed some grasp of the facts before explaining anything to its citizens. There had been no abnormality up to that point. No progress either, but no failure. The regular afternoon contact was almost due, so the other side should have been ready. Rossiam also maintained backup equipment, making simple mechanical trouble unlikely. The official began to suspect an emergency. Velgrynd, meanwhile, drew her own conclusion. This world did not have the level of magical technology needed to interfere with communications like this. The Yohma had to be involved, and naturally they had chosen the exact moment she needed the line. She decided that was unlucky for them, or perhaps Ludora's luck helping her again. Either way, the moment Velgrynd began acting, the Mystic's invasion was already in trouble. She worked the communicator with quick precision and drew 2 intricate magic circles in the air, each about a foot across. Their light spread over the equipment. The circles converted her magical force into electronic signals, sent those signals to the receiver in Greater Rossiam, and destroyed the Mystic jamming in an instant. It was a trick beyond even this world's master sorcerers. Velgrynd asked if anyone could respond. The answer came as a desperate Mayday. Yohma were attacking the royal palace. All outside links had been cut. The Rossiam side had thought they were finished. Velgrynd told them not to panic. This was the conquering empire of Japan. She would not say Japan refused to help, but she did not appreciate being asked for favors out of nowhere. That brought the Rossiam soldiers back to themselves. After a hurried discussion, a calmer voice came on the line. He introduced himself as Sergei, director of the Foreign Intelligence Department of Greater Rossiam. He apologized for the panic and admitted that they needed support. They had sent messages across Rossiam, but none had answered. Could Japan reach the rest of their lands for them? Sergei explained that they could provide ciphers for Rossiam's military bases. The royal forces were still resisting, but the Yohma had the advantage. Non-combatants had been evacuated, but their hiding places would be discovered sooner or later. After that, the royal family's safety could not be guaranteed. Sergei wanted backup called from across the nation so the royals could escape while the Yohma were distracted. Greater Rossiam's fate depended on how Japan responded. Velgrynd, however, reminded him that she did not appreciate demands. Sergei tried to argue that if she could assist them, then surely. Velgrynd cut him off. What was happening to Rossiam did not matter to her at that moment. She was the one who deserved to make demands. It was selfish, but it was very much Velgrynd. Her demand was simple. Japan intended to hold an international summit to decide the future direction of the world. Rossiam's royalty or supreme commander would attend. If Sergei promised that, Velgrynd would help. The question Sergei should have asked was how. Somehow, he found he could believe her. He looked around at the nobles he had sworn to protect. Trusting a stranger from an enemy nation would normally be absurd, but betrayal would not make their situation much worse. They were already falling. So Sergei turned to Emperor Magellan and asked whether he could attend an international summit if that was the price of survival. Magellan agreed. Emperor Magellan of Greater Rossiam was 35, young but already in his 10th year on the throne. He was ambitious, and he had used his absolute authority to invade the Chinese Republic in order to secure the northern lands. Some in the military had opposed the war, but there were enough hawks that Magellan's will carried the day. Now, faced with an enemy far beyond human standards, he understood how powerless he was. It was too late for regret, but regret came anyway. Everything had gone well until the first operation against China, and then his nation began to unravel. Magellan was not an inept ruler. He had luxurious tastes, but if the people prospered, they could tolerate an elegant emperor. The war had started from Rossiam's desires, more arable land, an all-year port, and stronger defenses. But the invasion backfired so badly that they could neither advance nor retreat. By the time they realized the Yohma had manipulated events, recovery was nearly impossible. Magellan thought of the trusted confidant who had pushed his attention toward war. That man had been possessed by the Yohma. The Yohma were not simply trying to overthrow the world by force. They enjoyed making humanity fight itself, guiding nations toward their own destruction. That was why Magellan was still alive. He knew they could not defeat the Yohma. Even if Pulcinella had remained on humanity's side, Rossiam might have fallen. And now the Mad Priest himself had been taken by the enemy. Riots were spreading through the capital despite the lack of fighting inside Rossiam's borders and despite food supplies still holding. The war had made people anxious, but this level of unrest did not make sense. It was being fanned by mystics and possessed believers who placed their faith in Pulcinella. The palace could no longer be protected by the Imperial Defense Department alone. If the streets were unsafe, it was only a matter of time before everyone inside the palace was caught. With no real hope left, Magellan accepted the demand from an enemy nation. Sergi saluted, returned to the communicator, and told Velgrynd they accepted all her demands. Unfortunately, he started to add, Rossiam was under emergency conditions. Even if they wanted to send their emperor to a summit, there was no way to move him. If Japan was sending reinforcements, he hoped they would be fast enough. Even if Sergi died, the imperial family had to survive. Velgrynd's answer changed the future. She told Sergei she was glad they were not as stupid as she had feared. She would deploy a gate there so they should pass through and come to her. The air warped in front of Sergei and the others. Through the rift, they could see the room where Velgrynd sat. It was dimensional connection, a power that linked two places regardless of distance. Everyone except Velgrynd reacted in unified shock. In that moment, they understood who held true authority. Whatever happened, they must never get on that woman's bad side. The Japanese officials were just as stunned when people from Greater Rossiam appeared in the intelligence office. Some thought they were dreaming. One person actually pinched their own cheek. Others tried to analyze it by comparing it to Shinbutsu-ranked teleportation magic, but their brains could not keep up. No one could imagine connecting two spaces so far apart. Only the most resilient officials grasped what it meant. Velgrynd had effectively united three nations in an instant. The staff of the Foreign Ministry's Intelligence Division were overwhelmed. Some called her a goddess outright. By then, nobody dared defy her. Even the senior officials were quickly learning the value of respectful brown-nosing. Velgrynd observed that China was the only one left. If three nations had agreed to the summit, that should satisfy China's condition, right? The officials answered yes very quickly. Velgrynd told them to handle the rest of the negotiations themselves. Nobody was foolish enough to refuse. Their pride was now on the line and they would reason with China somehow. Then Velgrynd turned to the bewildered Rossiam leaders. She asked whether everyone important had made it through. She apologized, but anyone outside the room she had connected to was beyond what she could agree to save. If they destroyed the Yohma quickly enough, however, she thought they could still rescue many of them. The Rossiam leaders could only nod. Not everyone from the imperial court had escaped, but they were more concerned with their own survival than assigning blame. There was no way to put that responsibility on Velgrynd. Sergi recovered first and thanked her. That prompted Magellan to do the same. He offered his appreciation and promised that once everything was over, she could accept whatever reward she wanted. Velgrynd was not interested. She said she did not need anything because Rossiam could not fulfill her wish anyway. They should just cooperate with the operation. Magellan was taken aback, but he was not foolish enough to be offended. In that room, his title as emperor meant little. He understood that his life had been spared mainly because Velgrynd found him useful. He asked the name of the woman who had saved him. Velgrynd told him to call her Ryu-oh. Magellan thanked Ryu-oh again, and Velgrynd told him she would inform them when the summit time was set. Until then, they could rest in Japan. She was acting every inch an empress herself. In that room, her word was law. The Japanese staff adapted quickly. One official ran to arrange living spaces for the unexpected guests. Another bowed to Magellan and his entourage, ready to escort them to a reception room until their rooms were prepared. The division of roles happened without a meeting, and even Velgrynd was impressed by the teamwork. Then the most self-important official in the foreign ministry saw a chance to flatter her. He offered her top-of-the-line Gyokuro green tea instead of black tea. No reason to waste time while waiting for China's response, he thought, and no reason to waste an opportunity to make himself look good. Velgrynd accepted, calling it thoughtful. The official introduced himself as Kanji Yamamoto and declared that her words alone filled him with supreme satisfaction. Yamamoto never let up for even a moment. His staff considered that one of his greatest talents. Velgrynd tasted the Gyokuro and praised its airy sweetness and refreshing aftertaste. Yamamoto proudly said it came from one of his favorite shops. When Velgrynd said she liked it, he immediately offered snacks as well. Next came fondant au chocolat, exuding an elegant sweetness. It was almost decadent to serve such a luxury during wartime. Yamamoto had obtained it for himself through the full exercise of his money and authority. But now he offered it to Velgrynd. The taste pleased her. Velgrynd asked whether his name was Kanji Yamamoto. Then she said she would remember it. Yamamoto was tremendously honored. Velgrynd had almost never bothered to remember the name of any human being in her life, but she could be surprisingly vulnerable to brazen bribery. Yamamoto might have earned that victory by realizing so quickly that money would not impress her, while a well-timed luxury might. After some waiting, the good news came in. China had responded. They would attend the summit. With that, the Five Nations Summit was official. When Velgrynd reported this to Oharu, he was shocked. A summit everyone believed impossible had been arranged with almost absurd ease. Once again, he had no idea how far Velgrynd could go. He was lucky she was on his side, but if that favor depended only on her personal affinity for him, it was almost too strange to believe. Friendly terms could change instantly at her whim. That frightened him. Trust was normally something built over time. People learned each other's boundaries, what pleased them and what angered them. Nations were the same. Without shared values, they could not easily get along. The mystics were clearly enemies because there was no reasoning with them, and even if they were intelligent beings, a line had to be drawn. Then there was Velgrynd. She happily told Oharu, whom she still saw as Ludora, that she would arrange the summit site too. What time worked for him? Oharu realized that Velgrynd was exercising complete trust in him, and that was exactly why he had to remain careful. His conclusion was simple: answer kindness with kindness. He had no choice but to trust her, so he would not stew over the danger. He would express his gratitude with all the sincerity he had. That was the only repayment he could offer. He thanked Velgrynd and said it would make him even happier if she continued helping him. Velgrynd laughed with pure joy. Ludora's happiness was her happiness, and Oharu had chosen the correct response. The summit was scheduled for after lunch the next day. A strategy against the Yohma had to be formed quickly, so there was no time for elaborate arrangements. Oharu prioritized efficiency. Time differences and the other leaders' existing duties did not matter anymore. The other nations accepted the schedule. Communicating that decision fell entirely to the Foreign Ministry's intelligence department, creating plenty of tense moments, but Velgrynd did not care. She did, however, remember Yamamoto. She told him to keep up the good work. That compliment was the greatest consideration she offered anyone, though it was unfair because Yamamoto's staff were the ones doing most of the long hours while he mostly sat nearby. Even so, Velgrynd already had new demands for them. She ordered them to prepare a solemn, impressive sight by the next morning, something befitting His Majesty the Emperor. Yamamoto agreed immediately. The demand was unreasonable, but refusal was not an option, and he almost seemed grateful for it. Velgrynd neither knew nor cared what that said about him. Then she asked him to move a communicator to a larger room. Yamamoto did not understand. He had assumed the summit would take place over voice lines, and he was already planning to put the equipment in the largest meeting hall. Why did she need a larger room? Velgrynd explained that she intended to bring people from all the other nations to Japan, just as she had done with Greater Rossiam. It would save trouble and eliminate wasted time. Yamamoto could barely process that. It was beyond common sense. But if it was possible, then yes, some part of him admitted it was better. Velgrynd asked whether he had a complaint. Yamamoto denied it immediately and promised to begin at once. Velgrynd smiled, satisfied for the moment, and left. Yamamoto looked around at the ministry officials. When one of them asked what they would do, Yamamoto snapped back the only answer available. They would do exactly what she said. The site had to be moved immediately, and a communicator had to be installed in Meeting Hall number 2 at the same time. So began a long, sleepless night for the intelligence department.
Route confirmed. The next episode and full playlist are ready.
Then don't stop here. Keep watching in story order and subscribe before the next part drops.